Desperation has a way of blinding people to logic. I recognized it in the eyes of the men and women gathered in the dim basement that night, their faces lit by the flickering glow of a single bare bulb. They'd come for answers, or perhaps absolution, from a man who called himself Ezekiel. He stood before us dressed in flowing white robes that felt out of place in the damp, moldy space, like a preacher who had taken a wrong turn and ended up in a thieves' den. At the time, I wasn't sure why I was there. I had no job, no savings, and no prospects, but even then, joining a so-called movement sounded like a waste of time. Still, the rumors intrigued me. Ezekiel wasn't just a leader, he was a prophet, or so they said. A man who could justify any crime, wrap it in a veneer of divine purpose, and make you believe that stealing wasn't just right, it was righteous. "You've been lied to," Ezekiel began, his voice deep and commanding. He didn't shout, yet his words filled the room, demanding attention. "They told you that wealth is earned, that to take what you need is sin. But I tell you this, the world is ours. The riches hoarded by the few are our birthright, and you, each of you, have been chosen to reclaim it." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. Most of the group murmured their approval, nodding along like hypnotized sheep. I didn't buy it. Not yet. "Chosen by who?" I asked, my voice cutting through the reverent silence. Ezekiel turned, his piercing blue eyes locking onto mine. "By the divine," he said, as if that explained everything. "I am but a vessel for the truth. What society calls theft, the divine calls justice. And you, my friend, are here because you feel it too, don't you?" I wanted to dismiss him as a lunatic, but something about his gaze made it hard to argue. He wasn't just spouting nonsense, he believed it, and his conviction was infectious. The others looked at me expectantly, waiting for my response. I shrugged. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe you're just good at selling fairy tales." Ezekiel smiled, unshaken. "Skepticism is natural, but in time you'll see. The divine doesn't ask for blind faith, it reveals the truth through action." Over the next week, I learned just how far Ezekiel's influence extended. His so-called Church of Divine Reclamation wasn't just a collection of lost souls looking for meaning. It was a well-oiled machine. They had hackers, forgers, and getaway drivers. They had safe houses across the city. Most importantly, they had a plan. Targets weren't chosen at random. Ezekiel claimed to be guided by divine insight, selecting only those who deserved to lose their wealth. Corrupt politicians, ruthless CEOs, people who exploited the system for personal gain. It wasn't about greed, he insisted. It was about justice. My initiation came during a heist at the mansion of a hedge fund manager who had evicted dozens of families to build luxury condos. My role was simple: disable the security cameras while the others looted the safe. As I sat in the control room, watching the feeds go dark one by one, I heard Ezekiel's voice crackling through the comms. "Take only what the divine wills. Leave the rest as a symbol of mercy." When we regrouped at the safe house, my heart was pounding. Not from fear, but from exhilaration. I'd spent years scraping by, taking whatever low-paying gigs I could find, always wondering why the world felt so rigged against people like me. Now, for the first time, I felt like I was fighting back. Ezekiel greeted us like a father welcoming his children. "You've done well," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "The divine is pleased with you, Nolan." That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the events of the day. I didn't believe in the divine, not really, but I couldn't deny the thrill of it all. Maybe Ezekiel was right, or maybe he was just a dangerous man with a dangerous idea. Either way, I was in too deep to walk away now. Ezekiel's plans grew bolder with each passing week, and so did my role in them. What started as a hesitant observer's curiosity had turned into active participation. I wasn't just a pawn in his schemes anymore. I was part of the inner circle. Ezekiel called us the Covenant, a group of 7 he claimed were chosen by the divine itself. We were the architects of his holy crusade, or, as I sometimes suspected, just the ones who hadn't yet questioned his authority out loud. The next heist was unlike anything we'd attempted before. Our target was a private art collector named Victor Halloway, a reclusive billionaire with a taste for the rare and exotic. His penthouse was a fortress, equipped with biometric locks, motion sensors, and private guards who didn't hesitate to shoot first and ask questions later. But Ezekiel insisted that the divine had marked Holloway for judgment. His sin, according to Ezekiel, was hoarding cultural treasures stolen from nations that had been plundered during colonial rule. It's not just about wealth, Ezekiel said during one of our planning sessions, his voice calm but commanding. It's about returning what was never theirs to take. The divine demands restitution. I nodded along with the others, but doubt gnawed at me. If restitution was the goal, why weren't we working with activists or historians? Why were we keeping the spoils for ourselves? Or, as Ezekiel framed it, for the greater mission? These questions lingered, but I kept them to myself. I'd seen what happened to those who openly doubted Ezekiel. They weren't cast out or punished. No, their faith was simply broken. And without faith, they drifted, lost in the chaos Ezekiel had plucked them from. Our heist began with me and Carla, Ezekiel's tech genius, disabling Holloway's penthouse security from a van parked 2 blocks away. Carla's fingers flew across her keyboard, her laptop screen glowing with lines of code and flashing warnings. I sat beside her, sweating in the cramped space as I listened to Ezekiel's voice over the comms. Phase 1 is complete, he said. Nolan, Carla, proceed to Phase 2. Phase 2 involved creating a blackout. Carla hacked into the city grid, shutting down power to Holloway's building and half the block around it. It was risky, but it worked. From the van, we watched as the lights flickered out and the street descended into darkness. The guards scrambled, their flashlights bouncing in the chaos. That was our window. The rest of the team, Andre, Malik, and Sarah, entered the building through a service elevator Ezekiel had arranged access to earlier. I stayed behind, monitoring their progress through a private network Carla had rigged. Watching the live feed from their body cams, I felt my pulse quicken. They moved with precision, bypassing laser grids and unlocking safes with tools I didn't even recognize. For all Ezekiel's divine rhetoric, it was clear we weren't amateurs anymore. But then, something unexpected happened. The camera feed from Malik's helmet flickered, then cut out entirely. His voice crackled over the comms, filled with static. I think there's someone... The line went dead. Malik! Ezekiel's voice was sharp, his usual calm shattered. Report! Nothing. The rest of the team froze, their breaths audible through the comms. Ezekiel turned to me. Nolan, what's happening? I scrambled to find an answer. I don't know, it's like the signal's being jammed. Maybe Holloway's got countermeasures we didn't know about. Fix it, Ezekiel ordered. His tone left no room for debate. As Carla worked to restore the connection, the remaining team pressed on. They reached Holloway's private vault, a gleaming steel door that looked impenetrable. Sarah crouched by the keypad, inputting the code Ezekiel had given her. The vault hissed open, revealing shelves lined with gilded frames and ancient artifacts. The team moved quickly, loading their bags with priceless treasures. But Malik was still missing, and the tension in the air was suffocating. Leave no one behind, Ezekiel said, his voice softer now, almost reverent. Find Malik and bring him home. Andre and Sarah hesitated, then nodded, splitting up to search the penthouse. Carla finally restored the feed, and the grainy image of Malik's body cam flickered back to life. What I saw made my blood run cold. Malik was lying on the floor, unconscious or worse. Standing over him was a man in a black suit, holding a gun. Who the hell is that? Carla whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a heist anymore. Someone else was playing a game we didn't understand, and they were always one step ahead. The feed from Malik's camera flickered but stayed on. The man in the black suit bent down, lifting something from Malik's jacket. A small device I didn't recognize. My breath caught as he held it up to the camera. What is that? Carla hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ezekiel didn't answer. He leaned closer to the monitor, his face a mask of control slipping at the edges. The man in the suit straightened, tucking the device into his own pocket before walking out of frame. Malik's camera went dark again. Get out of there, Ezekiel commanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Now! Andre and Sarah were still combing the penthouse. They paused at Ezekiel's words, both glancing back toward the vault. Their body cams revealed the treasures they'd taken, now abandoned in haste. The team had rules, ironclad laws Ezekiel had instilled in us. But this, leaving empty-handed, that was unthinkable. Ezekiel, Sarah said, her voice firm. What about Malik? We're not leaving him. You don't understand, Ezekiel replied. This isn't a negotiation. Get out now or we all burn. My heart pounded. It wasn't like him to sound afraid, not even during the closest calls in previous heists. Ezekiel was our unshakable guide, the prophet of our chaotic mission, but now he sounded like a man who'd seen his gospel crumbling. Sarah ignored him. She turned to Andre, who nodded silently. Together, they moved deeper into the penthouse toward where we'd last seen Malik. Carla and I exchanged a look in the van, but there was nothing we could do from here. As they approached Malik's last known location, the air seemed heavier. Their cameras caught glimpses of the opulent penthouse, gold-framed mirrors, blood-red velvet curtains, but it felt more like a mausoleum. Then they found him. Malik was propped against the wall, his face pale and slack. Sarah knelt beside him, checking his pulse. He's alive, she said, relief evident in her voice, but out cold, probably drugged. Andre scanned the room, his weapon drawn. We need to move. Whoever that guy was, he's not far. Ezekiel's voice came through the comms again, quieter this time. Leave him. Leave everything. Just get out. Sarah's head snapped up, fury in her eyes. What the hell is wrong with you? We're not leaving him. But before Ezekiel could respond, the cameras picked up a sound, a faint beeping. Andre froze, his gaze dropping to the floor. The beeping grew louder, faster. Then he saw it, a small device tucked under a nearby chair, its red light blinking. It's a trap, Andre said. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed his fear. We've got to. The explosion wasn't deafening. It was sharp, contained, almost surgical. The feed cut out for a moment, the screen dissolving into static. When it returned, Sarah and Andre were sprawled on the floor, coughing but alive. Malik hadn't moved. Carla cursed under her breath, frantically checking the feeds. It wasn't meant to kill them, she muttered. Just a warning. Ezekiel didn't look relieved. If anything, he looked worse. They're toying with us, he said. This isn't about Holloway anymore. It's about me. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice rising. Who is they? What's going on? He turned to me, his eyes blazing. You think I'm the only one who's ever believed in the Divine's mission? There are others, sects, factions. Not all of them follow my path. Some think I've strayed. And this, he gestured to the screen, this is their message. I stared at him, disbelief coursing through me. You're saying this is some kind of holy war? Between thieves? Not thieves, Ezekiel corrected. Believers. The room was silent except for the sound of Sarah and Andre dragging Malik toward the elevator. Carla and I watched as they made their way down, avoiding the remaining guards as best they could. When they finally reached the street, Ezekiel instructed them to head for the rendezvous point, but his focus wasn't on their escape. It was on me. Nolan, he said, his tone shifting, I need you to stay with me on this, no matter what happens. His words sent a chill down my spine. What does that mean? What aren't you telling me? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the screen, watching as the others disappeared into the night. Then he muttered something under his breath, so quiet I almost didn't catch it. They won't stop until they've taken everything. The ride back to our safe house was tense. Malik was unconscious in the back seat, Sarah cradling his head while Andre drove in silence. Carla and I stayed in the van, trailing behind them, while Ezekiel sat beside me, uncharacteristically quiet. His usual air of calm authority had cracked, replaced by something darker, something defensive. What did you mean back there? I finally asked, unable to bear the silence. That this is about you? Ezekiel didn't answer at first. His fingers tapped rhythmically on his thigh, his mind clearly racing. Not everything is as it seems, Nolan, he said finally, his voice low. You think this is just about money, power, or revenge? It's bigger than that. It always has been. I gritted my teeth. You can't keep hiding behind riddles. We're risking our lives, and we deserve to know what's going on. He turned to me, his eyes sharp. You think I'm hiding something? Fine. Here's the truth. There's another group out there. Call them a splinter cell. They've been watching us for years, waiting for the right moment to make their move. This was their declaration of war. War? I repeated, incredulous. Over what? Control, he said simply. Of the mission, the ideology, everything. They believe theft is divine, yes, but their interpretation is, let's just say, it's less merciful than mine. I couldn't stop myself from laughing bitterly. Merciful? You've led us into some of the most dangerous jobs imaginable, all in the name of some higher purpose? And now you're telling me there's a group even crazier than you? Ezekiel's gaze didn't waver. You don't have to believe me, Nolan, but if you don't take this seriously, we're all dead. I opened my mouth to argue but stopped when Carla gestured toward her screen. We've got company, she said, her voice tense. Sure enough, a pair of black SUVs had appeared in the rear view, their headlights glaring through the darkness. They didn't speed up, didn't make any overt moves, just followed, keeping a steady distance. Friends of yours? I asked Ezekiel, my sarcasm masking real fear. He leaned forward, studying the SUVs through the side mirror. No, he said after a moment. They're not with me. The next few minutes were a blur of coordinated chaos. Carla relayed instructions to Andre, who took a sudden sharp turn down a side street. We followed, weaving through the city's labyrinthine back roads, but the SUVs stayed on our tail. They're not amateurs, Carla muttered, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she tried to hack into the city's traffic cameras. Whoever they are, they know what they're doing. Ezekiel grabbed the comms. Andre, head for the bridge. Nolan, be ready to switch vehicles. Switch vehicles? I shot him a look, but he was already on his phone, issuing rapid-fire commands to someone on the other end. Within minutes, we reached the bridge, a long, narrow expanse cutting across the river. As we approached, I saw another van waiting at the far end, its engine idling. This is insane, I muttered. But I followed Ezekiel's lead. The plan was executed with military precision. Andre slammed on the brakes halfway across the bridge, blocking the SUV's path. Carla and I jumped out, grabbing Malik and transferring him to the waiting van. Sarah and Andre joined us moments later, while Ezekiel stayed behind, walking calmly toward the approaching SUVs. What the hell is he doing? Sarah hissed as we sped away, leaving Ezekiel behind. None of us had an answer. Back at the safe house, the atmosphere was grim. Malik was still unconscious, Sarah tending to him with whatever first aid supplies we had on hand. Andre paced the room, his fists clenched, while Carla stayed glued to her laptop, trying to make sense of everything. We can't just leave him out there, Sarah said finally, her voice shaking. And do what? Andre snapped. You saw those guys. They weren't here to talk. He's our leader, she shot back. You don't just abandon your leader. Maybe he's not the leader we thought he was, I said quietly. The words hung in the air like a guillotine. Carla looked up from her laptop, her face pale. I found something, she said. Those SUVs, they're registered to a shell company linked to a man named Victor Lacroix. The name sent a chill through the room. Lacroix was a ghost, a name whispered in the darkest corners of the underworld. If he was involved, this wasn't just about Ezekiel's feud. It was about something far more dangerous. What does he want with us? Sarah asked. Carla hesitated, then turned the laptop around. On the screen was a message, sent directly to her terminal. Your leader owes a debt. We're here to collect. The safe house was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a crucible of doubt and fear. Andre's pacing turned into a full-blown tirade. We're sitting ducks here. If Lacroix knows where we are, it's only a matter of time before he makes his move. We don't even know what Ezekiel's done, Sarah fired back. What if this is some misunderstanding? He's always had a plan. Andre slammed his fist against the table. And how many of those plans have gotten people killed? Huh? Malik's barely alive because of him. Carla, still glued to her laptop, raised her hand. Enough. Both of you, shut up. I'm trying to keep us off every radar from here to Timbuktu. If Lacroix finds us, we're toast. I sat in the corner, silent. The message on Carla's screen kept replaying in my head. Your leader owes a debt. We're here to collect. What kind of debt? Money, power, or something worse? Ezekiel's absence was a void, but his influence was suffocating. Every decision he'd made, every sermon he'd preached about our so-called divine purpose, had brought us to this breaking point. I thought back to his words, "It's bigger than money or power." Was it? Or was that just his way of dressing up greed in holy robes? Suddenly, Carla gasped, "They're moving." We all turned toward her. On her screen, a map displayed multiple red dots converging on our location. "How close?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. 5 minutes, maybe less." Panic erupted. Andre grabbed a duffel bag of weapons, tossing a pistol to Sarah and a knife to me. "We fight our way out. It's the only chance we've got." "And go where?" Carla snapped. "They've got resources we can't match. If they don't kill us, they'll make an example of us." "Then we don't let them take us," Andre growled. But as much as I admired Andre's bravado, I knew he was wrong. Fighting Lacroix's men head-on was suicide. My mind raced, trying to find a way out. That's when I remembered Ezekiel's cryptic instructions before he left us. "There's a second safe house. Use it if you have no other choice." I pulled Carla aside. "Do you still have the address Ezekiel mentioned? The other safe house?" She frowned but nodded. "Yeah, why?" "Because if we don't move now, we're dead," I said. "I don't like it any more than you do, but Ezekiel wouldn't have mentioned it unless it was important." Andre overheard and shot me a look. "You're still trusting him after all this?" "What choice do we have?" I snapped. "We stay here. We die. We go there. Maybe we live long enough to figure this out." Reluctantly, Andre agreed, and within moments we were packed up and on the move. The address Ezekiel had given Carla led us to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It looked like nothing more than a relic of the industrial age. But as we stepped inside, we found a fully equipped hideout. Bunk beds, supplies, even a secure comms room. "Looks like he planned for this," Sarah murmured, her tone a mix of awe and suspicion. Carla immediately began securing the perimeter, setting up firewalls and monitoring equipment. "We're off the grid here. For now." As we settled in, the weight of the situation pressed down on us. Andre stood by the window, watching for any signs of pursuit, while Sarah tended to Malik, who had started to stir. Carla, ever the tech genius, continued digging into Lacroix's network. "Found something," she said after an hour. "Lacroix's operation goes way deeper than we thought. He's not just after Ezekiel, he's after the entire ideology." "What do you mean?" I asked. Carla turned the laptop toward us. On the screen were documents, photos, and intercepted messages detailing a years-long effort to dismantle Ezekiel's cult and seize its resources. "They're not just trying to kill us," she said. "They're trying to erase us. Every account, every asset, every connection, it's all being targeted. Ezekiel wasn't lying. This really is a war." Andre scoffed. "So what? We fight back? With what army?" Carla shook her head. "Not an army. Information. Lacroix has a weakness, something Ezekiel's been holding over him for years." "And what's that?" I asked. Carla hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's the only thing keeping Lacroix from wiping us out completely." As the tension in the room thickened, a sudden knock echoed through the warehouse. We froze. "Did anyone see us come here?" Andre whispered, his hand on his pistol. "No," Carla said firmly. "I wiped our trail." The knock came again, louder this time. Sarah looked at me, fear in her eyes. "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer, but as I reached for my weapon, a familiar voice called out from the other side of the door. "It's me. Let me in." Ezekiel. The room erupted in chaos. Andre wanted to shoot him on sight. Sarah pleaded for calm, and Carla demanded answers. But I silenced them all with a single word. "Wait." I opened the door and there he was, disheveled, bloodied, but alive. "You've got a lot of explaining to do," I said. "And you'll get it," he replied. "But first, we need to talk about Lacroix." Ezekiel stepped inside, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Ezekiel wasted no time after stepping into the warehouse. He locked the door behind him and moved with a determined urgency, as though the weight of the world rested on his next words. "You all need to listen carefully," he began, his voice hoarse but commanding. "Lacroix isn't after me. He's after us. Everything we've built, and he won't stop until he's erased every trace of our existence. Tell us something we don't know, Andre shot back, his tone laced with venom. Like why you disappeared when we needed you the most, or what debt you owe him that's put us all in the crosshairs. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. It's not a debt, it's leverage. What kind of leverage? Carla asked, her hands poised over her keyboard. I've been digging through everything I can find on Lacroix, and it looks like he's more than just a crime boss. He's got connections everywhere, politics, law enforcement, even the clergy. Ezekiel nodded grimly. That's because he's not just a crime boss. Lacroix is a zealot. He believes he's on a holy crusade to purify the world of false prophets, and he's decided that's what we are. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like a dark cloud. So what does he want? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Why come after us? Because of this, Ezekiel said, pulling a small weathered journal from his coat. The cover was unassuming, but the way he held it told me it was something far more significant. What's that? I asked. Ezekiel opened the journal to reveal pages filled with names, dates, and transactions. This is a ledger. It contains every dirty deal, every bribe, every betrayal Lacroix has ever committed. I've had it for years, hidden away as my insurance policy, and now he knows I still have it. Andre's laugh was humorless. So you're telling me this is all because of some book? You put us in this mess over a glorified diary? It's not just a book, Ezekiel snapped. This ledger could bring down Lacroix and his entire operation. It's the one thing he can't afford to let exist. Carla's eyes lit up with realization. That's why his network has been so focused on erasing us. If we're gone, the ledger might disappear with us. Exactly, Ezekiel said. But it's not just about survival. This is our opportunity to fight back, to expose Lacroix for the monster he is. And then what? Andre challenged. Even if we take him down, someone else will just take his place. You're always preaching about divine purpose, but this sounds like a suicide mission. Ezekiel's gaze was steady. Maybe it is. But if we do nothing, we're already dead. The room erupted into arguments, everyone talking over each other. Sarah accused Ezekiel of recklessness. Andre demanded an immediate escape plan, and Carla tried to calm everyone down. But through the chaos, I found myself staring at the ledger. It was a paradox. This tiny book held the power to destroy an empire, but it also felt like a ticking time bomb. If Lacroix wanted it that badly, he wouldn't stop until he had it. And that made me wonder, was Ezekiel really our savior, or was he dragging us deeper into a war we couldn't win? Finally, I raised my voice. Enough! The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. We can argue all we want, but it won't change the fact that Lacroix is coming for us. The only question is whether we face him on our terms or his. Ezekiel nodded, his expression unreadable. So what do you propose? I hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision. We use the ledger. If it's as powerful as you say, then it's our best shot. But we do it smart. We find someone outside his reach, someone who can expose him without putting us directly in the crossfire. Carla perked up. I might know someone, a journalist I worked with before joining you all. She's relentless and has no love for people like Lacroix. Ezekiel considered this. It's risky, but it could work. If we get the ledger to her, she could blow this wide open. And what about us? Andre asked. You think Lacroix is just going to let us walk away? No, Ezekiel admitted. But if we play this right, we might just buy ourselves enough time to disappear. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the best we had. As Carla began making contact with her journalist friend, the rest of us prepared for what felt like the final act. Weapons were loaded, supplies were packed, and escape routes were mapped out. Through it all, Ezekiel remained calm, his confidence unshaken. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was keeping something from us. Late that night, as the others slept, I approached him. Tell me the truth, I said. Why are you really doing this? Is it about the ledger, or is there something else? Ezekiel's eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw a flicker of doubt. I told you the truth. The ledger is our only chance. But it's not the whole truth, I pressed. What aren't you telling us? He sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the question. There's more at stake than you realize. Lacroix isn't just trying to erase us. He's trying to erase the idea that people like us can stand up to him. If we fail, it's not just us who lose. It's everyone who's ever believed in something greater. It was a noble sentiment, but it didn't answer my question. And as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ezekiel's crusade was about more than just Lacroix. It was about himself, and that terrified me. The safe house was a cacophony of whispers, hurried footsteps, and the occasional clatter of a dropped weapon. Carla worked tirelessly at her laptop, her face lit by the cold glow of the screen as she uploaded the final pieces of the ledger to the journalist. Andre paced in the corner, muttering to himself while checking and rechecking the safety on his pistol. Sarah stood by the window, watching for shadows that might give away Lacroix's inevitable arrival. Ezekiel, as always, stood at the center of the room, radiating a calm that felt more unnerving than reassuring. He was preparing for something, though none of us could be sure what. "We're ready," Carla announced, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "The journalist has everything. She promised it'll go public within the hour." Ezekiel nodded. "Good. Then it's time." "Time for what?" Andre snapped, his nerves clearly frayed. "Because I don't see us walking out of here alive once Lacroix knows the ledger's gone public." Ezekiel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped to the center of the room and raised his hands as though preparing to deliver a sermon. "We've come to the moment of truth," he began, his voice low but commanding. "For years we've worked in the shadows, believing that our cause was righteous. We stole not for greed, but to balance the scales, to remind the world that the powerful are not untouchable." I watched him carefully, trying to decipher his true intentions. There was something in his tone, something final. "But now we face a different kind of enemy," Ezekiel continued. "Lacroix isn't just a man. He's a symbol of everything we've fought against. Greed, corruption, in the belief that power is its own justification. And symbols are harder to destroy than men." "So what's your plan?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "You're not seriously thinking we can fight him head on?" "We won't have to," Ezekiel said. "The ledger is already out there. By the time Lacroix realizes it, his empire will be crumbling beneath him. But he will come for us, not because he needs to, but because he wants to make an example." "And you're okay with that?" Andre demanded. "You're just going to let him kill us to prove a point?" Ezekiel smiled, a weary but defiant expression. "No, Andre. I'm going to make sure he never gets the chance." The room fell silent as Ezekiel walked to a large duffel bag in the corner. He unzipped it to reveal a cache of explosives, enough to level the entire building. "You're insane," I said, stepping forward. "This isn't what we signed up for." "No," he agreed. "It's what I signed up for. You don't have to stay. There's still time for you to escape." "And go where?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Lacroix will hunt us down no matter where we go." "Not if he thinks you're already dead," Ezekiel said. "This building will be his grave and mine. When he arrives, I'll make sure he and his men don't leave." "You're asking us to trust you with our lives," I said, my voice hard. "And you've already lied to us once. Why should we believe this will work?" Ezekiel stepped closer, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that was almost hypnotic. "Because I've never been more certain of anything in my life. This isn't just about us. It's about the message we leave behind. If Lacroix dies here, his empire dies with him, and the world will see that even the most powerful can fall." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy with both hope and despair. Finally, Carla broke the silence. "If we're going to do this, we need to move now. Lacroix's men will be here any minute." Ezekiel nodded. "Then it's settled. You all leave through the back tunnel. I'll stay and finish this." We gathered our things quickly, the tension in the room reaching a breaking point. As I prepared to leave, I turned back to Ezekiel one last time. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Really?" He smiled faintly. "Because someone has to, and because every movement needs a martyr." I wanted to argue, to pull him away from what felt like a suicide mission, but there was no time. The distant roar of engines signaled the arrival of Lacroix's convoy. We fled through the tunnel, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the narrow passage. When we emerged into the night, the warehouse was a distant silhouette against the dark sky. Then the explosion came, a deafening roar that shook the ground beneath us. Flames erupted from the building, illuminating the night like a second sun. For a moment we stood in the stunned silence, watching as the symbol of Lacroix's power was reduced to ashes. It wasn't until much later, when the news of Lacroix's death spread across the globe, that I began to understand what Ezekiel had truly accomplished. He hadn't just destroyed a man, he'd destroyed an idea. But as I watched the world react to his sacrifice, I couldn't help but wonder, was he a hero or just another zealot willing to burn everything down for his beliefs? I suppose the answer didn't matter. Ezekiel's story was over, but ours was just beginning. And whether we liked it or not, we were now the torchbearers of his vision, a vision of a world where even the most powerful could be brought to their knees.